I gave you this template with the project files, with the original handout that had the project brief in it. You're going to see in the layers this top layer called layer 1. That's just indicating the space that your graphic will take up. Now that it's just a black square, but it can actually act as a mask when we bring our graphic in. The second layer here is for your caption. And to revise the text on that caption, you'll click on the icon here, the T, and that's in the layer, so the little T icon on the layer. That'll highlight the type that's on that layer, and then you can go in and you can recreate your caption. You can type your caption right there. The layer that is on the bottom, that's simply the interface items. That's kind of the background. You don't need to interact with that at all. It's these two layers that you're going to be working with. So I'm just going to go to a graphic here that, cute puppies, they can heal our hearts for sure. So it's always good to look at a cute puppy right now. Your graphic, however you get that developed, is up to you. You can do your Instagram graphic, you can do that in Photoshop, you can do it in Illustrator, you can even do it in InDesign. The main thing you have to do is get it into Photoshop. So for example, if you do it in Illustrator, you can open that Illustrator file from Photoshop. You can export that graphic as a JPEG and open it from Photoshop. You can, from InDesign, you can export as a JPEG. And of course, if you're working directly in a Photoshop file, you can drag and drop the layers. One thing you want to do, if you are building your Instagram graphic in Photoshop, you'll want to flatten the layers. Now I don't have any layers on this at the moment, but I'm going to add a layer here. So let's pretend you have several layers. You have maybe your text, some images, and so on in Photoshop. The easiest way to get that file from this document, or that graphic from this document, into your other one is to flatten that image. So if you go into the flyout menu of that file, and that's the flyout menu of the layer panel, you can go to flatten image. So flattening the image essentially takes all of the layers and just turns it into one. So what's easy about, or what makes that, let me try again here. What makes make this easier is because you can actually take that single layer, and this counts even if you've just opened a JPEG that you exported from another program. You can take that layer, drag it, and I'm holding on to this. I'm dragging, my mouse button is down. I'm going to go right on top of the tab for my template, so for this other document. But I'm still holding on. I'm going to hold on right until I'm in that document. And it's going to place that layer into that document. So I'm going to do that again. Now, even if I had this window out, if you're working in a different way and you've got your Photoshop files as windows rather than layers, you can still drag that layer from one, and you can actually drag it right onto the window space of the other document, and it'll bring that layer in. So either way, what you're doing, you're dragging and dropping layers from one document into the other, whether you drag onto the tab or you just drag into the window space when they're separate windows like this. I prefer to have mine as tabs within the main window, so that's when I just drag that layer from the layers palette, holding on, drag over the tab, still holding on, and then I drop it onto the graphic. Now, once it's in here, it's going to drop onto the layer above whichever layer I was on. Or I should say that a different way. It's going to become a layer above whichever layer I previously had selected. So when I dragged that layer in, it came in above my type layer because that's the one I was previously working on. So I'll do that again. I'll drag and drop that layer. And now it's in my layers palette. Now we can see it's too large, of course, at the moment. That's fine. I'll deal with that in a moment. And it's, of course, not exactly where we want it in the layers. So what I'm going to do is an actual shape mask. It sounds scarier than it is. It's actually very useful. You can shape mask any layer into essentially any shape. Even if that shape was a word, you can shape mask into it. We're not going to get there with this tutorial. We're just going to be showing how you can put that into that layer, that black box, that layer 1. So the first thing I'm going to do is get this image, the graphic that I'm putting into, going to shape mask into this shape. I'm going to get it above. So I'm going to drag that in my layers palette. Remember, you can drag and drop layers within the layer panel itself. And I'm just going to place it above. So I have my image layer, and beneath it is my shape layer. Next, I'm going to mask that in. So the way I'm going to do that is hover over the line in the layers panel, hover over the line between the two, and I'm going to hold my Option key down. If you're on a PC, that would be the Alt key. I'm going to hold Option, and you'll see when I'm hovering over that line between the layers, it gives me this little icon essentially saying you're going to put this layer into that layer. And that's what that icon is showing. That's why you're hovering on the line between the two. So Option held down, and I'm going to click. So what that did was literally mask away anything outside of this shape. And it really is as though it's putting this into that shape. Now I can still turn off this layer, but it will hide everything that's masked into it. I can turn off the graphic that I masked, and it just turns off. It hides that graphic altogether. Now, it was too big. Remember, it's quite large. I need to scale it down, of course. You always want to, when you mask into a shape, it's better to have a larger graphic than smaller. Remember, with Photoshop, you always want to be scaling down, not up. So I'm going to select the layer that I want to size. Of course, I've already got that. I know that with my main cursor, my move tool, I can move that around if I need to. But right now I want to scale it down. So that is Command T. So remember, Command T will give us that box by which we can scale. Or to get that, you can go to Edit and Transform. And you can choose Scale. So I did Command T while selected on that layer. And remember, for some strange reason in Photoshop, we don't need to use the Shift key anymore, because when we use the Shift key now, things skew. So not using the Shift key is what we want to do in this case. And using my space bar here to just pull that down. Of course, I can't because of the size of my graphic. So I'm just going to zoom out, and that's Space Command Option. And then I'll grab that other corner. I'm just going to size this because I had it sized as a square. It was a square graphic, which is ideal in this case to have as your original graphic. So having that square, and I'll get it sized to fit. And then once I've got it sized the way I want it, I'll click that check mark. And there we go. Now, still selected on that layer. I can still move it around, but I don't want to now because it is sized the way I want it. Okay, so that's a shape mask. Now, if you didn't want to do the shape mask, if you're thinking, you know, that's unnecessary, that's too complicated, I will say it's a fantastic Photoshop skill. It's quite easy to do. It's a great thing to know. However, if you don't want to do it, totally cool. I'll show you how you can do this without doing that. So I'm just going to release that shape mask. Actually, I'm going to undo several times here. Okay, now I'll release that shape mask. So the same thing, option click on the line between the two, and it will let it out. You can see it's got the cross through the icon now. So it lets that out. I'll zoom out, space command option, command T to get that bounding box. So now this time I'm going to scale it down. If you have a perfect square graphic, you can scale it right to the size of the black space there. Or if you have something that you need to trim some of the edges off, I'll show you how. So I'll press return or click the check mark and command 0. Now the black is behind this layer, and you can see that it sort of snaps to those edges. It helps us out a little bit there. But the bottom down here is beyond it. If I actually change the opacity on this layer, I'll see where that black is. So there it is. So this is quite simple as well. And this again would be if you have more graphic than you want and you're not masking it in. So I'm going to reduce that opacity again because I want to see where that black truly is. Now there are several ways to do this. I'm going to show you guys what I think is the easiest way. The best way is a little different. However, it's just, even though it's probably more efficient and faster, it's probably what many of you, it's just extra steps that I don't want to overwhelm you with. I will show you, but first I'm going to show you the easiest way. So I'll just change the opacity down on this. I'm going to go to my marquee tool here. This is a selection tool. Now keep in mind we're still selected on this layer. And I'm just going to click and drag to get that selection over the part of the image I want to delete or remove. So I select that area of the image, delete. I'll go down here, do the same thing, select and delete. And then that's a selection, so I can go to the select menu and deselect, or I can do command D, but I want to turn that selection off. Okay, now I'll increase the opacity again. And even if you want to be sure, I can see a little bit of the black there. I missed it by a pixel, so I'll just turn that off. It still makes a good mock-up. Not as accurate. I don't think it's as easy as doing the shape mask, but it's one of several ways we can do this. Now I'll show you one final way that is very accurate, but again, it's a little more complicated if you're not well-versed with Photoshop. So I'm going to undo again. That little puppy just staring at me is great. Okay, so I've undone that to the point where this is a little bigger than the square. It's on top. I want to get rid of that excess that's going beyond the graphic space defined by this black shape. So I'm going to command click on the thumbnail on the shape layer. And what command click does when we do that is it selects whatever's on that layer. So I'll command click. So it's defining that space, that shape layer space. Now I'm going to revert that selection. So myself, I do it with key commands, but I'm going to go to I shouldn't say revert, I should say invert, Command-Shift-I. So inverse. Now everything around that shape selection has been selected. I'm selected on that layer, the graphic layer, the one I want to delete from, and I can press delete, and then I can do my deselect, Command D. So I've still got my my graphic is there. It's still confined to the proper space, but it's even more accurate than what we did last time. Okay, so there are a few ways to do this. The ultimate thing you're trying to do is just get that graphic covering that black space. This black space indicates where your graphic should go. And then, of course, changing your caption. Remember, your captions should reflect your event. They're there to reinforce the graphic, give maybe some extra information that may not be in your event graphic.